Hello, welcome to Des Moines Magic. Today's Canadian Highlander video is brought to you by Old Cranky Man Collectibles. Before I introduce the players, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Make sure you turn notifications on so that you get notified every time we upload a video. At the top of your screen is Sean, playing Mono Red Goblins. Sean's points include Strip Mine, Price of Progress, Umezawa's Jitte, Mox Ruby, and Birthing Pod. At the bottom of your screen is Blake, playing 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation. His points include Natural Order, Demonic Tutor, Survival of the Fittest, and Birthing Pod. Sean's taking a mulligan to 5. Sean puts 2 cards on the bottom. He plays a Mountain. He casts a Goblin Sledder, and he passes the turn to Blake. Blake draws a card. He plays a Flooded Strand. He passes the turn back to Sean. Sean plays a Mountain. He attacks Blake for 1. Sean plays a Grinzo. At the end of Sean's turn, Blake activates his Flooded Strand. Blake finds an Underground Sea and puts it into play untapped. Blake casts an Entomb. Blake searches his library for Archon of Cruelty and puts it into his graveyard. Blake untaps. He draws a card. Blake casts a Chrome Mox. Blake casts Persist. He puts Archon of Cruelty into play with a -1/-1 counter. Sean sacrifices a creature, discards a card, and loses 3 life. Blake draws a card and gains 3 life. Blake plays a Steam Vince tapped and passes the turn back to Sean. Sean untaps, draws a card. Sean taps his 2 mountains to play a Conspicuous Snoop. He reveals the top card of his library, which is a mountain. He passes the turn back to Blake. Blake untaps, draws a card, attacks Sean with Archon of Cruelty, loses 3 life, discards a card, and sacrifices a creature. Blake gains 3 life and draws a card. Sean takes 5 from the Archon of Cruelty. Blake plays a Lotus Petal. He activates it and casts a Palace Jailer. Conspicuous Snoop is exiled under the Monarch. Blake plays a Breeding Pool tapped. He passes the turn back to Sean and draws a card for the Monarch. Sean untaps. He draws a card, plays a Mountain. Sean concedes Game 1 to Blake. Both players keep 7 cards for Game 2. He plays a Goblin Javelineer and attacks Blake for 1. Sean passes the turn to Blake. Blake draws a card. Blake plays a Prismatic Vista and activates it, going to 18. Blake searches his library for a snow-covered island, casts a Careful Study, drawing 2 cards, discards Grizzlebrand and Ottawara. He passes the turn to Sean. Sean untaps and draws a card. Sean plays a Mountain. Sean attacks Blake for 1. Sean casts a Goblin Smarkspith. Blake untaps and draws a card. Blake casts a Brainstorm, drawing 3 cards. Blake puts 2 cards back on top with Brainstorm, plays a Windswept Heath. Blake activates the Windswept Heath, going to 16. Blake finds a snow-covered forest and puts it into play untapped. Casts an Abundant Growth on the snow-covered forest. He draws a card. He passes the turn to Sean. Sean untaps and draws a card. Sean plays a Mountain. Sean plays a Battlecry Goblin and attacks Blake for 5. Blake untaps and draws a card. Blake casts the Modern Age. He draws a card. Discards Atraxa, Grand Unifier. Blake plays a Polluted Delta and passes the turn back to Sean. Sean untaps. He draws a card. Sean plays a Wasteland. Sean taps 2. He plays a Battlecry Goblin. Sean taps 2 more. He plays a Reckless Bushwhacker. He attacks Blake with all his creatures. Sean wins Game 2. Mulligans to 6 for Game 3. He puts a card on the bottom and plays a City of Brass. He passes the turn to Sean. Sean plays a Mountain. Sean taps the Mountain and plays a Gamble. Sean searches his library for a card and discards a card randomly. This is the turn back to Blake. At the end of Sean's turn, Blake taps the City of Brass and casts an Entomb, taking 1 damage. Blake searches his library for Atraxa Grand Unifier and puts her into his graveyard. Blake untaps and draws a card. He plays a snow-covered forest and taps his lands to cast a Demonic Tutor, taking 1 damage Blake searches his library for a card and puts it into his hand. He passes the turn to Sean. Sean untaps, draws a card. He plays a mountain. Casts Goblin Recruiter. Searches his library for Kiki-Jiki, Mind Goblin, Mog Fanatic, Conspicuous Snoop, and Skirk Prospector. He puts them on top of his library in any order. Blake untaps and draws a card. Blake plays a snow-covered island. He taps 3 mana, losing 1 life. Casts Loyal Retainers. Blake sacrifices Loyal Retainers to put Atraxa Grand Unifier into play. Blake reveals the top 10 cards of his library. Blake reveals Frantic Search, Utopia Sprawl, Wild Growth, Beseiju, Curring Nightmare, Birthing Pod, Night of Autumn, Prismari Command, Deathrite Shaman, and Verdant Catacombs. Curring Nightmare, Deathrite Shaman, Frantic Search, Birthing Pod, Verdant Catacombs into his hand. Discards Cavalier of Dawn and Faithful Mending to hand size. He passes the turn to Sean. Sean untaps. He draws a card. He plays a Mutavault. He plays a Goblin War Chief. Sean passes the turn back to Blake. Blake untaps, draws a card, and attacks Sean for 7 with Atraxa Grand Unifier. Blake gains 7 from lifelink. Blake plays a Verdant Catacomb. Blake activates Verdant Catacombs. Blake searches his library for a Bayou and puts it into play untapped. Blake taps the forest and puts Utopia Sprawl into play on the Bayou, naming Red. Blake taps City of Brass, losing 1 life. Blake casts Deathrite Shaman. Blake taps Bayou and Island for 3 mana and casts Recurring Nightmare. Blake sacrifices Deathrite Shaman, returns Recurring Nightmare to his hand, and puts Cavalier of Dawn into play. Dawn destroys Goblin War Chief. Sean creates a 3/3 Golem token. Blake is the turn of Sean. Sean untaps. He draws a card. Taps 3 to cast Mind Goblin. The chosen sticker is Phyrexian. Makes 4 mana. He casts Conspicuous Snoop, revealing a Mog Fanatic on the top of his library. Sean casts Mog Fanatic. He reveals Skirk Prospector. Casts Skirk Prospector. Reveals Kiki-Jiki. Sean makes infinite Conspicuous Snoop tokens. Sean sacks 5 tokens to cast Kiki-Jiki. Sean reveals Ardos from the top of his library. Sean sacrifices more tokens to make more mana with Skirk Prospector. Uses the mana to create infinite 1/1 Red Goblin creature token with haste, using the ability of Ardos. Sean wins the match 2-1.